morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio, the podcast where we talk with writers about their lives, their craft, their business, and their latest work. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and our podcast is sponsored by Bookmarks. Bookmarks is a literary nonprofit whose programs include the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas. Come visit Bookmarks at our community gathering space and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Inside the Writer's Studio is also proud to be an affiliate of Libro FM, the audiobook platform that supports your local independent bookstore. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast for more information on Libro FM and a special offer. My guest today is Peng Shepherd, author of The Cartographers and of the upcoming novel All This and More. Peng, welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I definitely want to discuss your new novel, All This and More, which is coming out in July. But first, I can't resist asking a few questions about The Cartographers, because this is a novel that brought you to my attention. And I have to say, it's one of those books that when I finished reading it, I was like, why didn't I write that book? It has all these elements of a Charlie Lovett novel in it. It's got a library and rare documents and mystery, and it really drew me in. Can you tell us just a little bit about The Cartographers for our listeners who haven't read it?
Sure. Well, it is unsurprisingly about maps and the secrets that are on them. I say that it's a mystery novel about map making and family secrets, and it follows the main character. Her name is Nell, who she discovers after her father dies, and he is also a very famous cartographer, that he has in his possession a secret map that at first seems, like essentially worthless, but it turns out that there's something about it that has made it very rare and very important, and that there are a lot of people after it, and it may have been the cause of his death. And so she takes this map and sets out to find out what is going on with it, what is so important about it, and who are the people that will do anything to get it.
I think the thing that really, to me, connected me to my own work is this idea of something that appears worthless but is actually priceless, and you can't figure out why. I just love. I think we can do this without spoilers, but I would love it if you would tell us the story about this cartographic court case that sort of first was the spark for some of the aspects of this novel.
Sure, yeah. I heard that story, I think it was something like 7 or 10 years before I wrote the novel, but it was the spark, and I could not forget the story. I kept thinking about it, for years and years and years, until I finally realized, well, I've got to write about it. But back in the 1920s or 1930s, there was a common practice among map makers of hiding basically intentional errors in their maps, really, really small things. Like, so they would add a little town that wasn't there, or they would change the name of something in a very minor way. And it was essentially a way to protect themselves from anyone stealing their work. Because if a different map maker copied their map and then, that error turned up on that map, you could prove that it had been stolen, because otherwise, if they had done their own work, that error shouldn't exist on the new map. And so in this day and age, it's much less common now that maps are often done on computers, because it's much easier to get your own data and build your own map. But back then it was very important and a very kind of essential secret practice of map makers. And there's a very famous court case, which was between a very big map company, Rand McNally, which we all know, and a very small map making company called General Drafting Corporation. And essentially what happened, General Drafting, they were one of the first companies to start making those foldable highway driving maps, if you remember those.
Yeah.
And so they cornered the market early. They got deals with a bunch of gas stations, and they had all of their little maps in these gas stations. And they were convinced that the bigger companies who had been slower to pivot were going to start stealing their work as a way to catch up. And so what they did was put one of these little intentional errors on one of their maps. They came up with a town, and they drove around while they were serving upstate New York. So they picked a place in the middle of nowhere. They invented a town that did not exist. They put it in the middle of this empty field, and they named it with a combination of their own initials, the two guys at the top. So, completely imaginary place. They told no one. Their map came out. And then I think it was like a year later or something, Rand McNally's map of the same area came out. And these two guys took a look at it, and their made up town appeared on Rand McNally's map. And so they went straight to court and they sued because they said, this is proof that Rand McNally copied our map because this town is not real. And Rand McNally got up in court and said, actually, the town is real. And so the two guys from General Drafting Corporation, they had no idea what to make of that. They got in their car with their lawyer and they drove out to the spot where they had planted this fake town where they were expecting totally empty field. And instead, they pulled up to an actual town. And there were people there were buildings, businesses, and the town had the same name that they had made up from a combination of their own initials.
I just think that's the most amazing story.
I know. It's just, yeah. So once you hear, I heard that 10 years ago and I was hooked.
And I think that, it's a general insight into us as novelists that there are certain stories like that that just stay with us, that we go, there's got to be something there. And it might take us a decade to figure out what's there, but I love that you held on to that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of those examples of, I mean, it's a real life mystery, you know. It sounds like absolute magic, but it's totally real. And yeah, so it just felt like a novel waiting to happen.
Yep. One of the other ways that I felt like some of my work, especially the Bookman's Tale connected to the Cartographers, is this exploration of the line between passion and obsession. Can you talk a little bit about how you play with that in the Cartographers?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's so the Cartographers follows a group of 7 cartographers. They're very good friends. They all went to the same program and they're all equally passionate about maps. But the kind of the heart of the story is how that passion ends up tipping into obsession for some of them, because it is a really fine line between the two. And the same way that there's a fine line between love and possession, or like love and control. And so what ends up happening, without spoiling the book, is that one summer this group of 7 friends they discover a map, and there is a secret on the map, and their passion for map making and their passion about that secret that they've discovered about cartography, each one of them takes it in a different direction, and some of them manage to just stay passionate about it and some of them become obsessed.
Well, I certainly commend the book to our listeners. It's a great read. I love the way you sort of get at the artistry of map making, which I feel like is kind of lost in the digital era. That our maps are very factually correct, but are they still works of art? I think we could talk about that all day. But so as soon as I finished reading this book, I called your publicist. I said, I got to interview her about this book. She said, well, she has a new novel coming out in July, and sent me this big fat arc of All This and More, which I read a couple of weeks ago. And again, this is a really fascinating book, but it's not, I have to tell our listeners, maybe what you think of when you think of a novel. You don't necessarily start on page 1 and read all the pages in order until you get to the end. So tell us a little bit about the basic setup of this book, what it's about, but also how it's structured.
Yeah. So this one, at first, I just want to say it was so much fun to write because it is very different from the Cartographers. And so I think I wrote it about twice as fast too. It's kind of amazing how books are so different that way. Yeah. But it is about it's about a woman who's kind of a little bit of all of us to some degree. Her name is Marsh, and her whole life, she's always like tried to do the right thing, tried to make the responsible choice because she thinks that's what you're supposed to do. And of course, perfectly laid plans, her whole life ends up kind of imploding anyway. And she's left with all of these regrets and realizes that she's gone about everything all wrong, and, just wishes that she could have the chance to redo everything, but that is not possible. Except in the world of this story, there is a mysterious new game show that has somehow figured out how to send contestants back in time to very specific moments in their pasts so that they can make a different choice at that point, which then changes their present lives. And, it sounds too good to be true, but the proof is right there on television, and just it has taken the world by storm, because that sort of a power would just be, like impossible and addictive. And so Marsh is miraculously chosen to be the star of the next season. And so she just dives in. She's desperate to get everything right this time. This is her only chance. But even as she starts making changes to her life and her life starts getting better and better, there's something weird going on behind the scenes, and she's got to figure out what's going on in time.
I love any novel that gets to the setup and then there's a comma and you say, except something strange
Oh,
is
yeah.
happening that we don't know about, because this novel could have just been the first part of what you said and still would be good. But then there's this whole other layer to it. You said that when you started writing all this and more, everything in your life was upside down. Tell us about the period of your life that this novel came out of and how they connect.
Yeah. Well, it started with the pandemic. And so it's not a novel. It is a pandemic novel, but it is not a pandemic novel in that it is about the pandemic. There is no pandemic in the book. It doesn't touch on COVID or anything. But that was when I started to get the idea for it because, for a period of time there, the world went from, nonstop chaos to basically a standstill. And we were all sitting around waiting. It was very hard not to take stock of, your present situation and decide, were you happy with it? Had you made the right choices? Were there things that you wish you could have changed or that could be different? And then at the same time, as you're doing all of this, inward analysis, there wasn't a lot you could do about it because we were just waiting. And so I think it was a combination of just like desperately wanting to be out of the house and like go travel, do something else, but also this fascination with, what if the possibility were there that you could make even bigger changes? What if you could go back into your past and redo things so at this present moment you could be in a totally different place? And that's where it all kind of started.
Now I have to ask you because we haven't quite touched on the other trick in this novel. Did you read as a child the choose your own adventure books that were so popular, I don't know how long ago, after my childhood, but probably before yours?
Yeah, I think they were. I definitely had a few. I don't remember exactly when they were. Maybe they were like a little bit before me, but I was reading everything at that point. I was one of those kids who, my mom would bring home one book, and then the next day she'd have to go out and just get another book because I'd already finished that one. And so, at some point she brought those home for me, and they are, I mean, they're just so fun, because I think when you're a kid you basically have no freedom and no choice, which is it's okay. You're little, you don't know about the world yet, your parents are protecting you, but you basically have no control of anything in your life. And then you got those books and for the first time you were kind of in the driver's seat making choices. And I think that was very appealing when you're, 7, 8.
So talk to us about how the reader is going to interact with this novel, all this and more, in that
Yeah.
same
So
way. Yeah.
yeah. So the book is basically about the allure and the danger of choice, right? Because choice is great, but also choice costs something. Every choice you make is going to cost you something. And so I did not want the reader to just passively read about that theme, I wanted to be able to somehow kind of pull the reader in and give them a chance to actively experience that, that excitement and that nervousness about what happens if I make a choice? What is it going to cost me? And so I wrote all this and more with multiple paths. And at various points in the book, you encounter a choice and you have to help Marsh decide which thing she's going to do and what she's going to change about her life. And you get to do it with her.
I think it amazes me that that hasn't been done more often because it's such a great idea. And I can remember in the early days of, maybe the mid 90s to the early 2000s, everybody was talking about hypertext and all of our books are going to be interactive and we're going to make all the decisions. And it just didn't seem to really happen. But boy, this one definitely puts the reader in the driver's seat in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it was really difficult to figure out how to do it. And I had been wanting to, I'm a structure nerd. That's one of my favorite things about writing. And so I had been wanting to write something with multiple paths for like years and years and years. But I knew that I needed the right kind of premise to do it. And as I sat on that idea for years and years, I realized why it doesn't happen very often and why there aren't more books about it. Because when you're writing a multiple path novel for adults, you I wanted the book to be conscious of the fact that it was asking readers to choose in some way. I didn't want it to just be a thing that readers were doing just for the gimmick of it, just to be flipping. I wanted there to be a reason in the plot of the story that a reader would have to be making a choice. And so it took me, until I finally thought of, oh, what if there were a game show that was letting you make choices about your life, and then that would be why you were choosing, because you are, in the context of this game show. And so that kind of opened the way to making everything make sense, because Marsh in the story is able to acknowledge that she's about to make a choice, or is able to weigh what she's giving up and what she's not. And the reader kind of feels complicit in it, because since it's a game show, you, the reader, almost feel like a viewer of the game show, or like a fan.
I mean, one of the things that struck me too, because I read it, at each choice you have the opportunity to just kind of go to the next page, is where one of the choices leads, and then one of the
Hmm.
choices leads somewhere else in the novel. And because I was traveling at the time and trying to keep track of a whole bunch of different things, I every time made the choice to just go to the next page. But what I
Hmm.
started to realize is that there's going to be parts of this novel that, I'm going to get to the end and there's going to be things you've written that I haven't read. And no matter what path a reader takes, and I just wonder what that feels like as a writer, to know that you're writing some things that some readers are not going to read because of the path that they choose going through the novel.
Yeah, it is interesting, but what I ended up doing that I think makes it feels better for me. So when I turned in the first draft originally, you had to jump at every point that there was a decision. There was no ability to continue straight through on a path if that's what you wanted. And my editor was the one that suggested maybe we do something like that. And so then at that point, what happened was I ended up putting my favorite chapters between all the paths. So that way I know as a writer that no matter what path you choose, you have read some of my favorite parts. And so that's kind of fun for me. But yeah.
I mean, I just think that the challenge of structuring it, the challenge of structuring any novel is enough. But the challenge of structuring a novel when you don't know what order the reader is going to read the chapters in, I think must have been remarkable. And I think you rose to the occasion for sure.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was I I really had to go over it and over it, because I wanted to make sure that no matter which way you go, it's always forward moving,
Yeah.
and that it always makes sense.
So as you said, this novel is set within the boundary of a reality television program. And I wondered if you been um, a longtime viewer of reality television? What do you think its popularity says about our society, both in reality and in the novel?
It well, I think there's something I didn't watch a ton of it before, because I for a long time I didn't have a TV. I just, didn't I was moving a lot, and so but I started watching some before I got really into writing this book. There's this one show in particular where people agree to get married, but the first time they see each other is at the altar on the first episode, where they have to say yes. I mean, just it's just mind blowing. I can't even imagine. I mean, it's so wild. And so I really understand how this stuff is addicting, because the things that you get to do on the show are just they're fascinating. And then I think part of the appeal is just I know that it is not real. I'm making air quotes here, where because some of it is scripted, or sometimes they're in the contestants are encouraged to make certain choices or behave certain ways. But at the end of the day, they are still real people. They're not actors, and they are there because I mean, it is their real lives. And sometimes the things that they choose on the show, like marrying somebody, that can have a profound effect on your life. And so I mean, I do get it. I think we're all just really curious about, you know, all the other things that we could have done, or what life would be like if this had happened or if that had happened. And so when you get to watch real people and not actors going through some of that stuff, it makes sense.
Yeah. And I think to me, there's certainly an aspect of voyeurism that comes into to all this and more with the understandable obsession that people have about a show that allows you to change, essentially change reality, but can you speak to that sort of voyeuristic aspect a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, it's again, we humans are just so curious, but I also think it's so much easier to um when it's your own life, it's very hard to see what could be, right or wrong about a certain choice. But then when you're watching someone else, everyone becomes an armchair expert in an instant, and it's like, oh, cool, well, of course she should do this, or why on earth would he do that? And so I think you get a little bit of satisfaction, not just in getting to see into the inner life of somebody, but you also, I mean, it sort of tells you something about yourself too.
Yeah, and you actually have in the TV show within your novel, you have viewers responding in real time in such a way that the people in the show can see their comments and see what they're saying about what's going on.
Yes, those were very fun bits to write because you've got, of course, you have the supportive people, and then also, of course, you have the trolls.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly seemed, I was like, this is a great little commentary on social media that's going on the side of this novel.
Mhm. And then as you get further into the novel, it turns out that these viewers sort of have a storyline of their own because they're able to see things that Marsh can't, and some of them start figuring out the weirdness that's going on even before she does, but they can't. It's very hard for them to tell her because they're viewers, not in the show, So there's kind of a narrative tension between what Marsh is starting to notice and what they're also figuring out separately.
So I wonder if you expect or what it will be like if this happens for readers as they're moving through the novel and they're making decisions for Marsh. Do you think they will also be contemplating or questioning decisions they've made in their own life at particular turning points? And if so, how does that self-reflection kind of affect their experience of reading your novel?
Well, I think it would be hard not to reflect on your own life, right? Because I mean, I know I did when I was writing it. And I think she does go on an adventure, and a lot of things about her life do get better, but she also, in some ways, is kind of a cautionary tale because if you really could just go back to your past and make different choices that would then change your present reality, I think the question kind of becomes, is that actually your life anymore? Because is that real, the things that you now have? And then conversely, would that matter if you were happier? And I think there's a tension between that. If is it real, and even if it's not, what's more important, the fact that you're happier or the fact that it may not be real?
I think it's Marsh who says that at one point says, "I never chose myself,"
Mm.
and talking about her life before the show. And obviously, in the show, she gets to choose whatever she thinks is going to be best for her. But can you talk a little bit about how the novel explores this balance between doing things for other people and doing things for yourself?
Yes. Well, so at first, Marsh does start out very focused on making sure that even as her own life is improving, she's not hurting anyone else or also trying to help other people too. She's got this teenage daughter that is really passionate about music, and she always is trying to make sure in every version of her life that her daughter, still has access to like music classes and she's still able to play and, she's still experiencing that. But it is also inevitable that as you make choices for yourself, you are making choices for the other people in your reality, even if you're trying to make the good choices for them. And so the further Marsh gets into her season, the murkier that line becomes, like whether she's doing a good thing or not, because even though all of their lives are really improving, she is the only one kind of in control.
Mhm, mhm. one of the other quotes that really stuck out for me, I'm a stickler for like underlining things in arcs and writing down quotes because every now and then there's a lot of them in this book that really popped for me. But this one is, what was a pesky thing like truth compared to happiness? Can you
Mm.
just unpack that for us a little bit in the context of perhaps the society that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the heart of the whole thing, right? Because
Mhm.
we're all so desperate for happiness. And that's totally natural. Happiness is a huge part of life. But our our world is so weird now. When I was younger, social media wasn't really a thing, and now it's this whole part of my life where I open up the internet and I see all these photos and like half of them are, maybe some of them are real, but most of them are not. And even if they are real, I know that it's a fake moment or it's the best moment of. And and so it does feel like it is making it more and more impossible to know what is real. And if you don't know what's real, it's also harder to kind of know if you're happy, because if all you can see is unrealistic happiness, then your realistic happiness just doesn't, it doesn't feel like it's of the same quality. But then, would you, if you could actually live in that Instagram photo, like what would that be like? It'd be kind of hell, right?
I mean, this, as you were saying that, I thought these are two very different novels, The Cartographers and All This and More. But maybe this is a point of conjunction for them, this exploration of what's real and what's not real. Um, I see that sort of peeking out between the pages of both of those books.
Yeah, that's a really good I did not think of that when I mean, we never think of that while we're
No, we
writing
never
it,
think
but
of this stuff when we're writing books. Of course not. I can't tell you how many times
yeah.
somebody's come up to me and said, "Oh, I love what you did there," and I thought, "Wow, if I had been aware of doing it, that would have been really good."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
um,
Oh, I really like that. Yeah.
somebody in this book, I can't remember who I attribute this quote to, but somebody says, "No matter where you are in life, there are still plenty of possibilities waiting for you if you're brave enough to jump." I think it might be the host of the show that says that. Um, I'm curious to know in your own life, what possibilities do you see if you that you might be brave enough to jump towards? I mean, if you were Marsh going forward, what leaps would you take?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, coming forward. Well, I mean, as you were saying that, the big jump that I was thinking about was actually the one that I made to become a writer, because
Mhm.
was I had grown up in love with reading and writing, and I was one of those kids who, you ask them what they wanted to be, and I would say, I'm going to write storybooks, when I was little. And then I said all the way through high school, I'm going to major in creative writing and nobody can stop me. And my parents were so thrilled with that. But it's just so thrilled. But then I got to university when at the moment when you can finally change your major, I basically chose everything but creative writing because I was suddenly terrified of it. And I was just afraid that I wasn't ready or that I was going to fail. And then if you fail at it, I just thought, are you allowed to try again? And so I kept putting it off, graduated with a different degree, started working full time in a totally different field. And kind of every, year or every so often, I would have this moment where I was thinking, I think I've made the wrong choice because I'm not as happy as I could be. I miss writing. It's the only thing that I really want to do. And every year, every day is taking me further from that as I continue on this path. But the further you go along on a path, the harder it feels to change over. And I had this sense that I was on a business trip for work, and I was there, and I just suddenly had this sense of like, if I don't do it now, it's just going to be too late, because if I get, I don't know, one more promotion or I stay at this company one more year, it'll just suddenly feel that'll be it and it'll be too hard to leave. And so I did quit my job. And then it had to be like a really big dramatic thing, I don't know why I couldn't have just done both. That would have been totally more reasonable. But it just felt like I had to do something really drastic to make it real for me, because I had been making it not real for myself for so long. And so that, as you were talking, asking me that question about like big things that you would do, like that was a really big thing for me, but it did change my life.
I mean, I think it's nothing original for me to say that inertia is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And I think sometimes
Hmm.
when we look back on our lives, those moments, like you talk about, are those moments when we make a conscious choice to interfere with inertia, to not just allow the path to continue the way it's been doing. And it does take courage, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that's really I think what Marsh is struggling with too, because it sometimes it feels like you have to make a really big change for it to happen at all. Like you almost need a game show that would let you rewrite your life to give you the courage to try something like that. It's kind of this outside force that can come in and, you know, because yeah, inertia is, I mean, it is the most insidious thing.
And Marsh is given this opportunity to make things different. The idea, of course, is that they would make things better, but different isn't necessarily better. But I do think there's always this voice in our heads that says oh, it could be better. No matter how great our life might be, there, there's always a voice that says, well, what if this happened? What if this made it better? Do you think that voice comes from a place of light, encouraging us to do more, or a place of darkness, telling us that we're not good enough?
Oh, good question. I think it starts out coming from a place of light because it's the thing that makes you, push harder. And I like for me, I probably never would have tried so hard to change my life and become a writer if I hadn't something hadn't been pushing me. But I think the danger comes when you don't know how to turn it off or you don't know when it's because it's always asking and it is good up until a certain point, but then there comes a point where you are almost like destroying things rather than making them better if you keep listening to it.
When you were imagining, I mean, you imagined some I don't want to say outlandish, but some pretty amazing paths for Marsh. I'm not going to give any details because I don't want to spoil anything, but we get to see her exploring different careers and exploring different parts of the world and different parts of her own, passions and abilities. While you were doing any of that, were you ever indulging in your own fantasies a little bit about, oh, what if I did this? What if I did that?
Sure, sure. I mean, yeah. Mostly the travel stuff, mostly
Yeah.
whenever she's going to, some super wild, amazing place. But it, I wanted it to feel at first kind of like an adventure. And then, the better things start to get, if there really was a game show that was this zany and powerful, eventually things would kind of start to get out of control because the show every episode has to keep topping itself. That's how everything is built, Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Everything, the next one is just got to top the one before it. And that's what kind of starts happening to Marsh is, first she goes to the beach and then what's better than the beach? And then she goes there and then what's better, and eventually she's like in outer space or something because there's, how do you top that? Eventually you are literally in outer space. And so I wanted it to feel uh kind of exciting and adventurous, but I also wanted the reader to have this a little bit out of control experience the way that it sort of would be if you were both the contestant of but kind of the guinea pig of a show with that sort of power.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I also got this feeling of like there's the possibility of too much success. You could
Hmm.
maybe if you get every single thing that you want, that's really not that great. You may not be as happy as you would be if there were still things you were striving for.
Oh, I think so. Because the whole point of the show is that you get your perfect life, right?
Right.
Everything can be perfect by the end. And that sounds great at first. Who doesn't want perfection? But if you think about it, perfection would actually be horrible because there would just be nothing left. It would be so boring
Yeah.
and everything would be exactly the same. Yeah. So it's, and that's something that Marsh starts to figure out partway through, and the viewers also start to figure out partway through because she, at a certain point in the story, perfection is possibly within her reach, but she hasn't fully grappled with what that would actually mean if she goes for it.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's interesting that when she is able to go back and rewrite all her own decisions, one way to look at that is that she is sort of subverting any notion of fate or destiny or anything like that, because she's running the boat herself instead of, allowing life to happen.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, she's still, so even if she were able to change her whole life into some other, perfect or ideal version, she still got all the memories of the way it was before. And I think that if you could remember the way it was before, it's probably impossible to truly escape your fate, right? Because you have still got it there. It's still in your soul. And so I think it's almost like a veneer, kind of what the show offers you is like a perfect veneer that's
Yeah.
put over something, but you're not, I don't know if you're fully able to change everything that's underneath.
The show starts out with this, I can't remember exactly what's called, a preamble or a preface or something like that, where we kind of go back and look at Marsh's life so that we have some context for these changes and decisions
Hmm.
that you're going to make. And so I've read about half of this book. We're traveling in New York. We go to see the Broadway revival of Merrily We Roll Along, and there's this recurring line in that show. How did you get to be here? What was the moment? And I thought, that should be on the cover of this book that I'm reading right now. And for both the readers and for Marsh, and for that matter for ourselves, how do we recognize those moments when the big decision is going to be made? Because it's not always who are you going to marry or what your career is going to be. How does Marsh recognize those moments where then the reader is going to say either page 27 or page 150?
Yeah. Well, I think that's also a hard question in our own lives too, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's really obvious when it's a big moment. But I do think that, when you look back now and you can, you know, go back a year or more years in your own life and you can think, oh yeah, that was the moment and I didn't even know it. And so that's also what Marsh is able to do because she has the benefit of she's like middle-aged in the at the moment that she becomes a contestant, she's middle-aged. And so she can now view, her 20s and her teens and even like her 30s from the position of, oh yeah, that probably was a moment and I just didn't realize it. And
Yeah.
so sometimes the things that she gets to go back to are really, really big moments, but sometimes they are the really tiny moments that if only she had, been more aware. But that's life. You sometimes you're ready for it and sometimes you're not.
Yeah, to me, one of the fascinating things about that whole question, and I certainly have moments like this in my life, is when you look back, as you said, and you realize, oh, that if I'd done something different in that moment, it might have changed everything. But then again, it might not have changed everything. No way
Yeah.
for us. Marsh can find out, but the rest of us can't find out.
Yep. Yep.
Well, we like to end every episode of Inside the Writer's Studio with the same 10 questions. You should be able to answer each of them in just a few words, but hopefully they'll give us some insight into you and into your writing. So if you're ready, we will begin.
Yes, I'm ready.
What word do you love to work into your writing?
Ooh, anything that starts with the letter I.
Oh, okay.
Intrepid. Let's go with intrepid.
What word do you hate to encounter in other people's writing?
Juice.
Where's your favorite place to write?
I always write at my desk,
Where could you never write?
in my bed.
To what rule of grammar do you pay least attention?
M dashes. Put them everywhere.
Yeah. What was the first book you remember reading?
I don't remember the title of it, but it was when I was just beginning to learn to read because my mom was having me sound out words and she made me say the word nabbed like 100 times. There was a bird nabbing a snack. Yeah, I'll never forget that word.
What are you reading now?
I just finished Hum by Helen Phillips, which is out in August.
What book would you like to have written?
The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins.
What sort of book would you like to write, but probably never will?
A really, really slim literary novel.
And finally, what would you like to hear a reader tell you?
Oh, well, my favorite thing is when they say that they uh screamed and threw the book across the room when they got to the twist. I love that. Oh no, I know what it is. I love it when they tell me that they cried.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
has been Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and my guest today has been Peng Shepherd, whose novel All This and More will be published on July 9th. Peng, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Inside the Writer's Studio is sponsored by Bookmarks, a literary nonprofit that runs the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas and operates a community gathering place and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. To find out more about Bookmarks and all its programs, visit www.bookmarksnc.org. Inside the Writer's Studio is proud to be affiliated with Libro FM. Unlike other audiobook platforms, Libro FM supports your local independent bookstore. Whether you buy a single book or, like me, a monthly subscription, you can link your account to your local store or to Bookmarks to support literary community. For a special 2-for-1 offer, go to Libro.fm and use the discount code WRITERS. If you've enjoyed Inside the Writer's Studio, please consider leaving a rating or review online at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode begins a new season on Inside the Writer's Studio, and this season we'll be posting new episodes on the 15th of every month. On our next episode, I'll be talking to Joanna Lowell about her novel, A Sure Thing. Until then, thanks for listening, and may you read with wonder and write with passion.